Russia submitted a harsh set of terms at the ceasefire talks with Ukraine in Turkey. Russia has demanded that Kyiv accept neutrality, limit its military, and permanently drop aspiration to join the NATO. The Russian memorandum also called for recognition of Russian control over Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, and Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson, a ban on Western arms and intelligence aid, and a full lifting of sanctions. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky dismissed Russia's proposal for a 2 to 3 day partial ceasefire, saying that Moscow only wants a short pause in fighting. The talks, which lasted just over an hour, failed to produce a ceasefire agreement. However, both sides did commit to a large-scale prisoner swap, including at least 1,000 military personnel each, with an additional swap of 200 possible. They also have agreed to exchange the bodies of 6,000 fallen soldiers. Zelensky said that Russia's goal is to continue the war and is now urging US President Donald Trump to approve tougher sanctions to pressure Moscow into a full ceasefire. Let's listen in to what Zelensky had to say.
Вони готові на ceasefire 2-3 дні, щоб забирати вбитих з поля бою. Я вважаю, що ідіоти, тому що, в принципі, ceasefire для того, щоб не було вбитих. Тобто ви бачите, бачите настрій. Тобто для них це питання просто невеличкої паузи в війні. Тому дуже хочеться, щоб наші американські партнери все-таки сильними кроками спрямували пакет санкцій. І тому для нас дуже важливо ще раз підкреслити, як на останній нашій розмові з президентом Трампом, що якщо в цей раз Стамбул буде щодо припинення вогню не рухатись вперед, то повинні бути сильні кроки від Штатів, передусім пакет санкцій.
Despite the impasse, the White House had said that Trump is open to meeting both Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Turkey if such a summit can help move talks forward. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has offered to host that meeting. Let's listen into what the White House press secretary had to say.
The President is suggesting that it's high time that leaders, President Erdogan, President Trump, President Putin and President Zelensky meet in Istanbul. Is that something that President Trump would support and would be partaking?
Well, the president has said he's open to it if it comes to that, but he wants both of these leaders and both sides to sit down at the table together. And we saw them do that at the urging of President Trump today. But as for how the president feels about those talks and what took place there, I'll let him speak on that.
Meanwhile, Russia's lead negotiator Vladimir Medinsky confirmed he met with Ukraine's defense minister before the wider talks began. Moscow, he said, is focused on a long-term settlement, not a temporary halt in combat. Elsewhere, officials say Russian attacks killed at least 5 civilians in eastern Ukraine in the last 24 hours. This came after the ceasefire talks in Turkey. Meanwhile, Ukraine has remained firm in its stance. The Ukrainian side has stated that there would be no recognition of Russian land grabs, no limits on its military, and no peace deal without a full unconditional ceasefire. Kyiv says it expects Moscow to respond to its own peace proposal by the end of June. Meanwhile, as the ceasefire talks were going on, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met key international partners at the NATO Eastern Flank Summit in Lithuania. Zelensky sat down with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, thanking the alliance for its steadfast support. In a social media post, he said he briefed Rutte on recent agreements reached in Istanbul over prisoner exchanges with Russia and the return of Ukrainian children. He also met with Norwegian Prime Minister to discuss continued support for Ukraine, including strengthening air defense systems, boosting investment in Ukraine's defense industry, and increasing pressure on Russia through additional sanctions. Zelensky also held talks with Romania's newly elected president, Nicusor Dan, congratulating him on his election victory. The two leaders discussed diplomatic efforts to achieve peace in Ukraine, recent negotiations with Russia in Istanbul, and the need to toughen sanctions against Moscow to curb its military production. Now we have guests joining us. Stephen Nagy He's a professor of politics and international studies from International Christian University, Tokyo, Japan. Thank you, Stephen, for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. What do Russia's punitive peace terms reveal about its real intentions, peace or prolonged dominance in Ukraine?
Thanks for having me. So it's really not about peace. Russia has not changed its position fundamentally from the position it laid out at the beginning of the invasion of Ukraine. And its position today is really maximalistic, understanding that it does have short-term to mid-term momentum on the front line. It is positioned its economy in terms of a wartime economy, and in terms of its leadership, the leadership is consolidated behind Vladimir Putin to pursue its long-term goals of fundamentally not just dominating the Ukraine, but creating a security arrangement with the United States. Ultimately, that is Vladimir Putin and Russia's long-term goal is establishing some kind of mutual security understanding, whether that's a sphere of influence understanding of security or similar in Russia's pursuit of some kind of settlement over the long term.
And Professor, building on what you just said, with Donald Trump expressing openness to meeting both Putin and Zelensky in Turkey, could this signal a breakthrough?
I don't think it'll signal a breakthrough for probably three reasons. First, Vladimir Putin's long-term intention really is to, again, establish dialogue and a security agreement with the United States that addresses Russia's long-term security concerns about NATO expansion. Second, I think that the security establishment within the United States looks at this possibility very negatively, understanding that a sphere of influence approach or agreement for Russia would reward its aggression towards Ukraine and would likely result in further Russian expansion into Eastern Europe. A third, and ultimately it's up to the Ukrainians. Are the Ukrainians willing to give up the 4 regions of eastern Ukraine as well as Crimea and be subject to Russian domination? And ultimately the Ukrainians, I don't think, are in that position, are willing to accept these terms. So it's really difficult to find a solution whether Mr. Trump is at the table in Turkey or not.
And Professor, speaking of Ukraine, Zelensky has urged Trump to approve tougher sanctions. Can international economic pressure realistically force Moscow into a ceasefire, according to you?
It's probably unlikely. Russia has created a wartime economy. It understands that it needs to use its energy resources to work with the global south and use that as an avenue for revenue. It's signed informally agreements with China to deliver energy resources to China in return for material support through third countries for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And ultimately, I think that these ties will continue to deepen as long as Russia maintains the status quo or deepens, albeit slowly, its engagement and its territorial grabs in Ukraine. Only if the United States and all European powers, as well as other developing countries, completely cut off or put sanctions on Russia, will there be an effect. But still, there's opportunities for Russia to have that hard income coming in from China and others, making it, having the ability to, again, continue to prosecute this war of aggression against Ukraine.
And moving forward, I'd like to also about the international community's role in this. How should the international community interpret Russia's demand for Ukrainian troop withdrawal before agreeing to a ceasefire?
Well, I think people that do follow Russia's long-term patterns of behavior understand it has a maximalist approach to negotiation, and its demands really are about subjugating Ukraine and bringing Ukraine into a Russian empire that's dominated by Moscow. It's not going to happen. The Ukrainians are not going to step back from fighting for their land. They view themselves as an autonomous sovereign state with its own culture, its own history, and its own government system, and they want to pursue that sovereignty moving forward. And I don't think that Russia's demands will be accepted by Ukraine, and they may be accepted by some members of the international community, but in general, I think many countries view Russia demands as unacceptable, but perhaps unfortunately something that Ukraine will have to accept in one form or the other because of the power asymmetry that exists between Moscow and Kiev.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into that. Is Russia's partial truce offer a genuine step towards de-escalation, or according to you, do you think that Zelensky suggests just a ploy for a short pause in fighting?
Well, I do think it's Russia's offer is very much about putting on the table its maximalist demands, and we should be clear that for Russia, Ukraine is part of it's a part of the broader equation of how Russia is looking at its long-term security, and it would like to come to the table with Donald Trump, find a way to create a new international order that addresses Russia's security concerns with the United States and with Donald Trump. It wants to, again, prevent the expansion of NATO. It wants to prevent Ukraine and other Eastern European countries from joining NATO, and even perhaps the European Union, understanding that these European countries, whether it's the Ukraine or others, when they join these institutions, that they will be more transparent, there'll be less corruption, they will Europeanize in many ways, fundamental characteristics that I think go against the nature of Russia and Vladimir Putin's state that really focuses on non-transparent forms of governance, really flawed democracy that doesn't have freedom of press, and focuses on keeping power in a small group of individuals rather than distributed through society.
Thank you very